Rejected some philosophical components of Hindu beliefs. He was very critical of the position of the Brahmins or priests in society at that time, which was a very elitist position. He was similarly critical of the caste system. He positioned himself as a result outside the caste system.
The Buddha spent his remaining years travelling through deep forests, across mango groves, from village to village. The curious would bring food and clothing for the philosopher and his band of followers, and in turn, he encouraged them to reconsider the purpose and point of life, to recalibrate their moral compass. Although the Buddha didn't establish a church or temple system as such, over time, the significant locations in his life were gradually turned into shrines. Originally, Bodh Gaya was just a pastoral sanctuary, marked out with a stone balustrade 200 years or so after his death. But by the 6th century AD, a full-blown temple, the Mahabodhi temple, marked the spot.
About 400 years after the first temple that was built here for the worshipping of the Bodhi tree was replaced by this kind of a temple built to enshrine the iconic image of Buddha, which had gained currency by that time. The temple, particularly the Mahabodhi temple, is representative of how important Buddhist temples were and how, this idea of building a temple to enshrine statues started from here.
As Buddhism's travelled through the centuries, perhaps inevitably it's taken on more the aspect of a religion with temples and pilgrims and a religious hierarchy. You could be forgiven for mistaking Buddhism as one of the great God-driven faiths of the world, but there is a key difference. By putting such an emphasis on a system of personal morality and breaking with the conventions and traditions and rituals of the past, in many ways, the Buddha was one of those men who gave us the modern world. And although he never denied that there were gods, he simply said, you don't have to rely on the gods to make everything okay.
According to Buddhist sources, having seeded a radical new world view, the Buddha died at the age of 84. His body was cremated, but his bones remained unburned. They were distributed amongst the various tribes, rulers and kingdoms who are now starting to follow the Buddhist way and who honoured its founder by building monuments or stupas over his remains. In Kathmandu, the capital city of Nepal, stands the Bodhanath Stupa, our second wonder of the Buddhist world. It was first built in the 5th or early 6th centuries AD, then rebuilt and restored a number of times, finally as this giant enclosed tomb in the 14th century. It is the largest in the Indian subcontinent, a sacred place for thousands of Buddhists throughout the world. Here at Bodhanath, I'm going to find out more about the 3 jewels of Buddhism.
Buddhism consists, as far as Buddhists are concerned, in 3 things which they call the 3 jewels, and those 3 things are closely connected. The first is the Buddha, the founder of their religion. The second is called the Sangha, and that is the community of monks and nuns. The third is called the Dharma. The Dharma refers to the preaching, the teaching of the Buddha. In other words, it's what the Buddha discovered, and it's also the truth.
As you walk around the Bodhanath here, you always have this sense that you're being watched, and that's because the Buddha's all-seeing eyes are always staring down at you. That squiggle in the middle of his face, incidentally, is not his nose. It's actually the Sanskrit character for the number 1 to represent a kind of unity in the Buddhist faith. Something you won't find represented up there are the Buddha's ears, and there is a particular reason for that. We're told that the Buddhist said he never wanted to hear that he was being worshipped. And of course, that is what is so unique about Buddhism. This is a religion without a central authority figure. Instead, there's just this credo that man is his own lord and master, that mankind itself can control humanity's destiny.
It's not atheistic because they do believe in the existence of sort of gods and angels and so on, but they simply don't believe that those beings have the universe under control, and therefore they cannot save us from suffering. They themselves need saving from suffering from a future time when they cease being gods and they become beings vulnerable to pain and suffering.
At the Bodhanath Stupa, one of the many people who come to circumambulate and to pay their respects to the Buddha is Annie Choying, a Buddhist nun famous throughout Nepal for her sweet singing voice. She is in fact known as the Singing Nun.
This is a very highly spiritual place we consider. It's a holy place. And we believe that all the great relics of the Buddhas are in the stupa, and then it holds a very special religious spot. And every people who comes around here are always reciting mantras and really focusing on meditation. They do the circumambulation, prostration, to keep the physical health healthy and the mind to be energy clean, chanting mantras as well as doing prayers. So trying to put yourself in a very good, positive discipline. This is a very, very highly blessed place.
Annie is originally from Tibet. Thousands of Tibetan Buddhists now live in Nepal as refugees. The brand of Buddhism here is as much Tibetan as it is Nepalese. Flexibility and diversity has always been one of Buddhism's strengths. The Buddha himself said there should be no one official Buddhist language. Instead, Buddhists are encouraged to focus on the universal relevance of the Buddha's wisdom.
There are some people here who will tell you that buried deep in that stupa is a fragment of the Buddha's bone. Now, I'm not certain we're ever actually going to be able to prove that, but what is sure is that this is the biggest stupa in the whole of the Nepal and one of the largest in the world. And it is immensely impressive, but do you know what's significant about it? Actually, it's not how it looks, but what it means. Because this was built to represent something very special. For the men who created this was nothing less than an incarnation of the Buddha's mind.
The symbolism of stupa is very interesting because it takes the elements of earth, water, fire, wind, and space, different shapes that represent those, and they put them in a kind of ideal aesthetic form. And so the idea is that the Buddha's mind is the awareness that the universe is the ideal environment for a human being to achieve freedom from suffering.
Around the Buddha gathered men who shared with him a common vision and goal. Gradually, this group came to be a formalised community, a body that took its name from the old aristocratic councils of the day, the Sangha. The Buddhist Sangha became a monastic tradition, comprising ordained monks and nuns, and it's one of the three jewels of Buddhism. My first experience of the Sangha came at what felt like an ungodly hour. At Bodhanath every morning, just after dawn, monks of all ages gathered to perform the first of many rituals of the day. The Sangha is one of the oldest, continuously active spiritual organisations in the world.
What's being recited here is a Tara Puja. It's a chant that aims to ensure a kind of liberation from suffering. And it's really interesting because Tara is thought to be a female manifestation of Buddha's wisdom, something which is incredibly potent. I mean, this isn't just an abstract idea of wisdom. This is thought to be able to be healing, to actually be stronger than medicine itself.
The Sangha includes women, and was set up to allow those who wished to practice Buddha's teachings a disciplined environment and maximum time to focus on the philosopher's ideas, free from the responsibilities and distractions of a domestic or conventional lifestyle. A few miles outside Kathmandu, Annie, the singing nun, runs her own nunnery. It's a refuge for girls, many as young as 10, the age both sexes can embark on the life of a Buddhist novice.
I have here mostly girls from families who are facing some difficulties, obviously poverty. And then other thing is the fathers are a little bit very ignorantly carried away with the alcoholic behavior as well as very abusive behaviors, and who doesn't think that it's good to send their girls to school. So I try to collect them here and give them as much as I can give them.
Controversial for its time was the inclusion of women among the ranks of the Sangha. The Buddha allowed women to become nuns, to lead a life devoted to spiritual development. Like Buddhist monks, nuns are expected to remain celibate, pure, since they are one of the 3 jewels of Buddhism, not just Buddha's foot soldiers, but an incarnation of the belief system itself. So, I've learnt about 2 of the 3 jewels of Buddhism, the Sangha and the life of the Buddha. But what about the 3rd jewel, the Dharma, or teachings?
You can perhaps help me out a bit. How do you describe Dharma? What does Dharma mean to you?
According to my understanding, what Dharma is, to do whatever you do very practically, skillfully, for benefit of the all beings, without causing any harm, and for their well-being, including oneself and all, is Dharma. Dharma na Hindu Bauddha ho, Sikh Islam na Jain, Dharma chitta ko shuddhata, Dharma shanti sukh chain. Dharma means the purity of heart. Dharma means peace. And Dharma means well-being of all human society.
Are there special ways that you can achieve Dharma? Are there rules and regulations that show you what to do?
We are taught what causes suffering and what can cause suffering and how to avoid causing suffering in life, one's own life. And when you implement those teachings, I think that is what really contributes towards one's own well-being and others' well-being. And I think that is considered Dharma.
In a Buddhist context, the word Dharma refers above all to the teachings of the Buddha as he rediscovered them in the process of his progress towards enlightenment.
The reality of the Dharma, which holds you free from suffering, is what they take the root of the word dharma, which means to hold, and the Buddha said dharma holds a being free from suffering.
Coming here to Nepal, it has been relatively straightforward to identify 2 of the jewels of the triple jewels of Buddhism. The Buddha himself, both ideas about him and his image are absolutely everywhere, as is the Sangha. Here in Kathmandu, there are monks and nuns at every street corner. But what has been harder to pin down is the Dharma itself, the belief system, the philosophy, the religion, whatever you want to call it, of Buddhism. Maybe it's unrealistic of me to expect there to be one single definition for such a broad concept. The Buddha himself said that the Dharma was like the salt of the oceans of the world, a universal taste.
So the Buddha implied the Dharma could be tasted anywhere by anyone. But the question for me as a historian is how that taste of the Buddhist Dharma could become universal. Practically, how Buddhism established itself as a global belief system. Buddha's teachings were charismatic and radical for their time, but, as with all big new ideas, they needed a groundswell of popular support, or a patron, or both, to gain a firm foothold and to really fly. While there was grassroots interest in what he had to say, it was about 200 years after the Buddha's death that Buddhism got a major boost. In 250 BC, the ruthless, all-powerful Emperor Ashoka, who controlled most of ancient India, proved Buddhism's greatest ally. Ashoka was haunted by the memory of the blood that he'd acquired on his hands as a result of the cut and thrust of his rise to power, and he decided to turn to the good. And in order to realise that ambition, he vigorously promoted Buddhist ideals right across the Indian subcontinent. According to Buddhist tradition, in the centuries following Ashoka's sponsorship of Buddha's ideas, the philosophy evolved into at least 18 different schools. One of these, the Theravada, still survives today and is mainly associated with South and Southeast Asia. Another came to be called the Mahayana, the Great Vehicle or Way, now most often found in North and East Asia. Ashoka, by embracing Buddhism, put a particular emphasis on the consequences of his actions, on what he thought and how he lived in the world, on his karma. Karma is a word well known in the West today. It has its roots in early Indian belief systems, but the value of karma became a fundamentally important Buddhist concept, and one that I'm going to explore at the Temple of the Tooth in Kandy, Sri Lanka, our next wonder of the Buddhist world. Sri Lankan Buddhists believe that the tooth relic was brought to their country around 300 BC. Safeguarding the relic became the responsibility of kings, and over the years, the custodianship of the relic came to symbolise the right to rule. The Buddha is said to have given two legacies to future generations: the body of his teachings, the Dharma, and also relics of his physical body itself, which are now scattered in shrines right across the globe. And one of the most precious is kept in here, in the Temple of the Tooth.
That relic makes the presence of the Buddha more graphic to people, so it gives them a power. Actually, many Buddhist temples around the Buddhist world have little relics, a piece of bone or something. Just like in Europe, you have relics of the saints. So it's a way of making the person's presence feel more immediate. That gives the temple more power as a magnet to draw the worshipper.
The shrine stands right at the centre of a paved courtyard. The ceiling is decorated with moonstones and floral designs. There are ivory reliefs on the doorways. The inner chamber contains the tooth relic and other sacred objects. And all around, there is a brightly painted corridor. Monks conduct daily worship in the inner chamber of the temple. Rituals are performed at dawn, at noon, and in the evening. The tooth is in this upper chamber in a casket of gold and is only revealed to a chosen few. The sacred relic is symbolically bathed with a herbal preparation made from scented water and fragrant flowers. This holy water is believed to contain healing properties and is distributed among those present. Once a week, mothers gather at the temple with their babies.
all these little babies are waiting to be taken in to be blessed by the priest so that they have Buddha's power with them for the rest of their lives. They're given a little white piece of string to wrap around their wrist, which shows that the Buddha is with them from now until they die. And it's thought incredibly important that they get the Buddha's blessing right at this early stage, because everything that they do from now on, all their intentional actions, what they think, what they say and what they do, their karma will affect how they are then reborn in the next life.
Karma is one of the main concepts of Buddhism. It's a belief that any of our intentional actions, both thought and deed, will be mirrored by something similar happening to us in the future. So if you harm someone, someone will harm you. This principle of cause and effect can bring consequences that are either good or bad, depending on what it is that you've done. Because Buddhists believe we have many lives, this good and bad karma can generate consequences both throughout this life and long into the next.
Karma is what you do. The word literally means deed or action. But the Buddha said that all karma that matters is what is morally good or morally bad. And you decide what to do. Now, we must remember that for Buddhists, your life goes on beyond what we normally think of as this life. In fact, you are reborn an infinite number of times until you manage to bring that to an end.
Buddhists use a metaphor to help explain what karma is. They say that if you sow thistle seed, then you can't expect apple trees to grow. And that is very clear. It's the basic principle of cause and effect. And as a historian, I know that that principle has real validity. We are all affected by our past, and our past and our present together informs our future. So when the Buddha said that we should be mindful of our intentional actions, of our karma, and that our highest authority is our conscience, then he was making real sense. And he was also clarifying something about what it is to be human.
Of course, the issue is that karma can be both good and bad. And in Sri Lanka, the fallout of action and reaction, of cause and effect, has been brutally tested in recent years. For nearly 3 decades, the country has been locked in a violent civil war, in which close on 100,000 people have been killed. Sri Lanka is only now emerging from this debilitating conflict between the Hindu Tamil minority and a Buddhist Sinhalese majority. The Temple of the Tooth was badly hit and partially destroyed during the war. It's now been fully restored. Buddhists believe this cycle of death and destruction can be broken. They assert that by following a certain path, it's possible to break out of a continuous round of life and death and rebirth, which in Buddhism has a name: samsara. And samsara is the concept I'm going to investigate now, as I move to the next wonder of the Buddhist world. Once Buddhist ideas had flourished in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan monarchs sent emissaries to adjoining kingdoms in Southeast Asia to carry the Buddhist message. By the 11th century, Theravada Buddhism was well established in Thailand, and here in Bangkok, close on 90% of Thais are now Buddhist.
The reason that Buddhism has thrived so vigorously and tenaciously here is because right from its very outset, it's had the support of Thai kings. A king here can aspire to be a Buddha himself, and there was one king who was actually a monk for 25 years before he came to the throne. Every time the royal family builds a new palace for itself, it will also construct next door a monastery and a temple complex as a kind of outward sign of its righteousness and commitment to the Buddhist cause. And here in Bangkok, the temple complex is certainly fit for a king. This is Wat Po, our next wonder of the Buddhist world.
It's the largest and oldest temple complex in Bangkok. It's home to more than 1,000 Buddha images. The complex includes a temple, a working monastery, and a large courtyard with a forest of stupas thick with exquisite handmade lotus motifs. And hidden within its own palatial hall, the golden reclining Buddha. The gold Buddha is 141 feet long and 49 feet high. Started in 1788, it took over 5 years to build.
This is one of the most stunning, gobsmacking works of monumental art I've ever seen. I have to say, I love its audacity. I love the fact that it says, look at me, look at what mankind can do when he manipulates raw materials to create a thing of beauty. Because here there are thousands of fragments of mother of pearl used and 153 plates of gold. But what it doesn't seem to me to say is that this is an incarnation of the middle path, that essential Buddhist notion that extremes and excesses should be avoided at all costs. Because there's no doubt that this is a thing of opulence. It's enormous, it's gorgeous, and it's very sensuous.
In history of Thailand, there are a lot of large-scale reclining Buddhas built all over central part of Thailand. Because to build reclining Buddha, it's not a very easy process. Because most of the reclining Buddha is not made from casting. It's made from bricks, plaster, or cement. It's considered a very respectful image. So it must be decorated with very valuable materials. And of course, the most valuable materials for decorating the image of the Lord Buddha should be gold.
Gold in Buddhism symbolises the sun or fire. The most valuable of metals, it's accorded a sacred status through its association with Surya, the sun god of the Hindu pantheon. For Buddhists in Thailand and other South Asian countries, gold is an element that signifies homage. A gift of gold is the ultimate demonstration of one's piety.
The meritorious act of putting gold leaf on the surface of the Buddha's skin is to commemorate the living Buddha, who had a kind of golden-like aura and radiance, they believe.
But gold and its association with wealth and might is also the way the Thai monarchs have used a showy form of piety to forge a strong relationship between Buddha's ideas and the power of the state. It was King Rama III who had the statue of the reclining Buddha opulently restored at the height of his reign in the mid-19th century.
It's called the lion pose. It says he lay there in the lion pose as he was preparing to die. It's described that he lay down on his right side and he rested his head on his right hand.
There's a reason that this Buddha has got such a serene smile. It's because he's achieved enlightenment, nirvana. It means that he's escaped what Buddhists call samsara, an endless cycle of life, of birth and death, of passion and desire and delusion that can only lead to pain and suffering.
Samsara effectively constitutes a cycle of birth and rebirth. And as long as we are in samsara, we are reborn innumerable times, moving from one existence to the next. We can be reborn as a human being, as a divinity, or you can be reborn as an animal, etc.
Tell me what you think samsara is.
For me, it's not just the physical picture of the circle of being born and aging and dying. For me, it has something to do with the state of mind as well, that you have to deal with your bad emotions. You have problems, you feel suffering, feel frustrated. You don't know how to deal with it, but this is just a small